Maya Thompson was not just any traveler on that crisp autumn morning. She was a woman who had built her life around breaking barriers and creating opportunities for herself and others. A successful business consultant, Maya had spent years climbing the corporate ladder while advocating for diversity and inclusion in workplaces. That day, she was returning home from a high-profile conference where she had delivered a keynote speech about empowering underrepresented voices in leadership roles. Her mind was buzzing with ideas, and she felt proud of the work she was doing. As she entered the bustling airport, Maya moved with purpose. Dressed in a sharp navy blue blazer and tailored trousers, she exuded confidence. After clearing security, she made her way to her gate, excited to board her first-class seat, a rare treat she allowed herself after weeks of relentless travel and hard work. Settling into her assigned seat near the window, Maya pulled out her laptop, ready to review some notes before takeoff. The hum of conversation filled the cabin as passengers found their seats, and everything seemed normal. But then something unexpected happened. Just moments before the plane was scheduled to depart, a flight attendant approached Maya with an expression that made her stomach drop. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the attendant said curtly, avoiding eye contact. Confused, Maya asked why, but the response was vague. "It's for safety reasons." No further explanation was given. Passengers nearby turned their heads, watching silently as Maya gathered her belongings, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The scene grew more surreal as Maya was escorted off the plane. Other travelers began whispering among themselves, clearly unsettled by what they were witnessing. One man leaned over to his companion and muttered, "What did she even do?" Another passenger, visibly frustrated, called out, "This is ridiculous. She hasn't done anything wrong." But despite the murmurs of support, no one intervened as Maya stepped off the aircraft, her heart pounding with anger and disbelief. Standing in the terminal, Maya tried to process what had just happened. Had someone complained about her? Was it because of how she looked? Or was it simply a case of racial profiling, disguised as policy enforcement? The lack of answers only deepened her frustration. When she approached airline staff for clarification, they offered little help, shuffling papers and avoiding direct responses. It became painfully clear that this wasn't about logic or rules. It was about prejudice. For hours, Maya sat in the terminal, replaying the incident in her mind. She thought about all the times she had been underestimated or dismissed because of her race. She thought about the countless stories she'd heard from friends and colleagues who faced similar treatment. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every Black person who had ever been made to feel unwelcome in spaces they rightfully belonged. As the reality sank in, Maya realized she couldn't let this moment pass without action. Little did she know, this seemingly ordinary flight would become the catalyst for extraordinary change, not just in her life, but in the lives of many others. After the humiliating ordeal at the airport, Maya felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and disbelief. But she also knew one thing for sure: staying silent wasn't an option. That evening, sitting in her hotel room, she opened her laptop and began typing. She poured her heart into a social media post, describing every detail of what had happened. From the moment the flight attendant approached her to the cold indifference of the airline staff afterward, she included photos of herself on the plane, calm and composed, as proof that she hadn't caused any disruption. Her words were raw but powerful, capturing not just her personal experience, but also the larger issue of racial bias that so many people face daily. When she hit post, Maya didn't expect much. She thought maybe a few friends would comment or share it, offering support. But within minutes, notifications started flooding in. People were outraged. Comments poured in from strangers who shared their own stories of being treated unfairly because of their race. Some recounted being removed from flights, while others talked about being followed in stores or ignored in professional settings. The post struck a nerve, resonating with thousands of people who had felt invisible or dehumanized in similar situations. By morning, Maya's story had gone viral, reaching millions across platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Journalists quickly picked up on the buzz. News outlets reached out to Maya, asking for interviews. At first, she hesitated. Sharing her story online was one thing, but speaking publicly meant putting herself in the spotlight and potentially facing backlash. Still, something inside her pushed her forward. If this could spark a conversation about systemic racism, then it was worth it. She agreed to interviews, appearing on morning shows, podcasts, and even late-night television. Each time, she spoke with clarity and conviction, making sure to highlight that her experience wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that needed to be addressed. The hashtag Justice for Maya began trending worldwide, accompanied by related tags like hashtag airline accountability and hashtag stop racial profiling. Celebrities joined the movement, amplifying her message to their massive followings. One actor tweeted, "If this can happen to someone as accomplished as Maya Thompson, it can happen to anyone. We need answers." Another singer posted a video urging her fans to boycott the airline until real changes were made. The pressure mounted, and soon the airline found itself at the center of a PR nightmare. Meanwhile, Maya received messages from people all over the world. Some thanked her for speaking out, saying her courage gave them hope. Others shared heartbreaking accounts of discrimination they'd endured, vowing to stand with her in demanding justice. A group of students from a university in another country even organized a protest outside the airline's local office, holding signs that read, "Respect Black women" and "Equality now." It was clear that Maya's story had ignited a global movement. What started as a single act of injustice against one woman had grown into something far bigger, a collective outcry for accountability and change. For Maya, this newfound attention brought both validation and responsibility. She realized she now had a platform to push for meaningful reform, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. As the days passed, Maya began thinking about how she could turn this moment into lasting impact. Little did she know, her journey was only beginning, and the world was watching closely. With the world watching and her story dominating headlines, Maya knew she couldn't let the momentum fade. The viral attention had given her a voice, but she wanted more than just awareness. She wanted justice. After consulting with lawyers who specialized in civil rights cases, Maya decided to file a lawsuit against the airline. This wasn't just about getting an apology or compensation. It was about holding the company accountable for its actions and forcing systemic change within the industry. The legal process was daunting. Lawsuits like this often dragged on for years, requiring mountains of evidence and endless court appearances. But Maya was determined. She worked closely with her legal team, gathering every detail of what had happened that day. Timestamps, witness statements, even screenshots of the vague responses she'd received from airline representatives after the incident. Her attorneys also dug deeper, uncovering a disturbing pattern. They found dozens of similar complaints filed by other passengers over the years, many involving Black travelers being removed from flights without clear justification. These cases had been quietly settled out of court, allowing the airline to avoid public scrutiny. Maya's case would bring all of that into the light. As the lawsuit progressed, Maya partnered with grassroots organizations and advocacy groups focused on racial equity. Together, they launched campaigns to educate the public about the prevalence of racial profiling in the travel industry. Flyers were distributed at airports, social media ads highlighted real stories of discrimination, and petitions calling for stricter regulations gained hundreds of thousands of signatures. Maya became the face of these efforts, attending rallies and speaking at events where crowds cheered her name. "This isn't just my fight," she often said during speeches. "It's our fight, for fairness, for dignity, and for respect." The airline, meanwhile, struggled to contain the fallout. Their initial response, a generic statement promising to review internal policies, only fueled more criticism. Customers began canceling flights, and corporate partners distanced themselves from the brand. Employees of the airline, too, started coming forward with their own accounts of discriminatory practices. One former flight attendant revealed how staff were sometimes encouraged to profile passengers based on appearance, while another employee described a toxic workplace culture that prioritized profits over people. These revelations painted a damning picture of an organization riddled with bias and neglect. Despite the mounting pressure, the airline refused to back down initially, arguing in court that Maya's removal had been a matter of safety protocol. But Maya's legal team dismantled this defense piece by piece, presenting evidence that proved otherwise. Witnesses testified that Maya had done nothing to warrant such treatment, and experts explained how subjective interpretations of safety were often used as excuses for discriminatory behavior. The courtroom drama captivated the public, with live updates trending on social media each time new information emerged. Through it all, Maya remained steadfast. She spent long hours preparing for depositions, reviewing documents, and strategizing with her lawyers. Though the process was exhausting, she drew strength from the support pouring in from around the globe. Strangers sent letters of encouragement, activists rallied behind her cause, and even some employees of the airline reached out privately to thank her for exposing the truth. Every message reminded her why she was fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved better. As months turned into years, the lawsuit became a symbol of resistance against institutional racism. It forced uncomfortable conversations about privilege, power, and accountability. For Maya, the battle was far from easy, but it reinforced her belief that change was possible, if you were willing to fight for it. And fight she did, knowing that victory wouldn't just be hers alone. It would belong to anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. While the lawsuit against the airline continued to unfold, Maya found herself at a crossroads. The legal battle was emotionally draining, and though she had become a symbol of resilience, she knew that waiting for justice wasn't enough. She wanted to take action, real, tangible action, that could make a difference right away. Drawing on her background in human resources and diversity consulting, Maya decided to channel her frustration into something transformative, a business that would tackle discrimination head-on. She named it Equity First, a firm dedicated to auditing companies for discriminatory practices and helping them build inclusive workplaces. The idea came to her late one night as she reflected on all the stories people had shared with her since her viral post. So many individuals felt powerless to change the systems they worked within, and Maya realized she had the expertise to help them. With funding from investors inspired by her courage and vision, Equity First quickly took shape. Its mission was simple yet bold: to create environments where everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, could thrive without fear of bias or exclusion. From the start, Maya poured her heart into the venture. She assembled a team of experts, lawyers, HR professionals, data analysts, and activists who shared her passion for equity. Together, they developed innovative tools to assess workplace culture, from anonymous employee surveys to detailed policy reviews. When a company hired Equity First, the process began with a deep dive into its operations. Maya and her team examined everything: hiring practices, promotion rates, pay disparities, even how employees interacted during meetings. Nothing escaped their scrutiny. What set Equity First apart was its approach. Instead of simply pointing out problems, the firm provided actionable solutions tailored to each organization's needs. For example, if a company struggled with promoting women of color, Maya's team would design mentorship programs and leadership pipelines to address the gap. If another company showed signs of toxic behavior among managers, Equity First would recommend restructuring teams or even firing problematic leaders. Maya believed accountability was key. If someone in power perpetuated discrimination, they needed to go. Her no-nonsense attitude earned her both admiration and criticism, but she didn't care. "If you can't respect your employees," she often said, "then you don't deserve to lead." Word of Equity First spread quickly. High-profile corporations, eager to avoid scandals like the one plaguing the airline, lined up to hire Maya's firm. At first, some companies were hesitant, worried about what an audit might uncover. But Maya reassured them. Facing the truth is the first step toward progress. Once clients saw the results, improved morale, higher retention rates, and stronger reputations, they became vocal advocates for equity first. Success stories circulated widely, further boosting the firm's reputation. For Maya, running Equity First was more than just a job. It was a calling. Every time she helped a company dismantle a biased system or fired a toxic executive, she felt a sense of fulfillment. It wasn't easy. There were moments when resistance from entrenched leadership tested her patience. But she reminded herself why she started this journey. Each victory, no matter how small, brought her closer to the world she envisioned, one where fairness wasn't an exception but the rule. As Equity First grew, so did Maya's influence. She became a sought-after speaker at industry conferences, sharing insights about creating equitable workplaces. Journalists hailed her as a trailblazer, and young professionals looked up to her as a role model. Yet through it all, Maya stayed grounded, remembering the day she was kicked off that flight. That moment had changed her life, but instead of letting bitterness consume her, she used it as fuel to drive meaningful change. Little did she know, her work was only beginning, and the impact of Equity First would soon reach far beyond what she imagined. After nearly 2 years of legal battles, the day finally arrived when the court would deliver its verdict. Maya sat in the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly together, as the judge prepared to announce the decision. The room was packed, reporters scribbling notes, supporters sitting quietly in solidarity, and airline executives looking visibly uneasy. When the judge began speaking, his words sent a wave of relief and vindication through Maya. The airline was found guilty of racial discrimination, ordered to pay substantial damages to Maya, and mandated to implement sweeping reforms across its operations. The judge didn't mince words. He criticized the airline for its gross negligence in addressing systemic racism, pointing out how years of unchecked complaints had created a culture of indifference. He emphasized that removing Maya from the flight wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of behavior rooted in bias. The ruling set a precedent, making it clear that companies could no longer hide behind vague policies or settle cases quietly. For Maya, this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a win for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Maya, eager to hear her reaction. Calm but resolute, she stepped up to the microphone and addressed the crowd. "This isn't about me," she said firmly. "It's about every person who has been made to feel like they don't belong. Today, we showed the world that accountability is possible." Her voice cracked slightly as she thanked her legal team, her family, and the countless strangers who had supported her along the way. "You reminded me that I wasn't alone," she added, tears welling up in her eyes. The crowd erupted in applause, chanting her name as cameras flashed all around. With the lawsuit behind her, Maya turned her attention to what mattered most, using the settlement money to create lasting change. She established the Equity Forward Scholarship Fund, dedicated to supporting young Black professionals pursuing careers in law, advocacy, and social justice. Growing up, Maya had often felt isolated in academic and professional spaces, dominated by people who didn't look like her. Now she wanted to ensure that future generations wouldn't have to face those same barriers. The scholarship covered tuition, provided mentorship opportunities, and even offered internships with Equity First. Within months, applications poured in from students across the country, each sharing their dreams of making the world a fairer place. The impact of the court ruling rippled far beyond Maya's case. Other airlines scrambled to review their own policies, fearing similar lawsuits. Industry leaders convened panels to discuss diversity and inclusion, inviting Maya to speak at several high-profile events. Corporations outside the aviation sector also took notice, realizing that ignoring issues of bias could cost them dearly, not just financially, but in public trust. Maya's story became a cautionary tale for businesses everywhere, proving that failing to address discrimination could lead to devastating consequences. For Maya, the victory reinforced her belief in the power of persistence. She thought back to that humiliating day on the plane and how far she'd come since then. What started as a deeply personal injustice had grown into a movement that challenged entire industries to do better. Yet, despite the accolades and media attention, Maya remained humble. She knew the fight for equity was far from over. There were still countless workplaces where bias thrived unchecked, and many individuals who felt powerless to speak out. But now, thanks to her efforts, there was hope and a blueprint for change. As news outlets covered the landmark decision, Maya's memoir hit bookshelves, chronicling her journey from victim to victor. Readers connected with her honesty and determination, turning the book into a bestseller. Through every interview, every speech, and every interaction, Maya continued to inspire others to stand up against injustice. The court's ruling may have closed one chapter of her life, but it opened another, one filled with possibilities for creating a more equitable future, and Maya was ready to seize them all. With her legal victory behind her and equity first thriving, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had proven that accountability was possible, but she knew the work didn't stop there. To keep the momentum going, she decided to expand her reach beyond corporate audits and consulting. Maya wanted to spark conversations about inequality in ways that were accessible to everyone, not just executives or HR professionals. That's when she launched Firing Back, a podcast dedicated to amplifying voices fighting for justice in all corners of society. Each episode of Firing Back featured candid interviews with whistleblowers, activists, and leaders who had faced adversity and refused to back down. From teachers battling systemic racism in schools to tech workers exposing gender bias in Silicon Valley, Maya gave these changemakers a platform to share their stories. Her warm yet probing interview style made guests feel comfortable opening up, often revealing details they hadn't shared anywhere else. Listeners were drawn to the raw honesty of the conversations, which ranged from heartbreaking to inspiring, and always actionable. At the end of every episode, Maya closed with what became her signature segment, Steps You Can Take. Whether it was encouraging listeners to vote for policies promoting equity, support local organizations, or have tough conversations with friends and family, she always left people with practical advice. Change starts with us, she'd say. It's not enough to be aware of the problem. We have to do something about it. This approach resonated deeply with her audience, turning Firing Back into a cultural phenomenon. Within months, the podcast topped charts and sparked discussions in workplaces, classrooms, and homes around the world. Simultaneously, Maya released her memoir, Rising Above, My Fight for Justice. The book chronicled her journey from being kicked off that flight to becoming a force for change. It wasn't just a retelling of events. It was a guidebook for resilience. Maya wrote openly about the fear and doubt she faced along the way, as well as the moments of triumph that kept her going. She included lessons learned and strategies for overcoming obstacles, making the memoir both personal and instructional. Readers connected with her vulnerability, seeing themselves in her struggles and finding inspiration in her determination. The combination of the podcast and the memoir elevated Maya's influence even further. She became a household name, invited to speak at global conferences, universities, and community events. Wherever she went, crowds gathered to hear her message of empowerment. At one event, a young woman approached her after her speech, tears streaming down her face. "Your story saved me," she said. "I was ready to give up on my career because I thought no one cared about fairness anymore, but now I know I'm not alone." Moments like this reminded Maya why she did what she did. Her work wasn't just about changing systems. It was about changing lives. Maya also used her growing platform to shine a light on lesser-known issues. Through Firing Back, she highlighted topics like environmental racism, healthcare disparities, and the challenges faced by LGBTQ+ communities. By weaving these stories into mainstream conversations, she challenged her audience to think beyond their own experiences and consider how interconnected all forms of inequality were. If we want true equity, she often said, we can't pick and choose which injustices matter. We have to stand together. As her influence expanded, critics began to emerge. Some accused her of being too ambitious, while others claimed she was trying to profit from activism. But Maya brushed off the negativity, knowing that pushback came with any meaningful progress. Instead of engaging with detractors, she focused on lifting others up. She collaborated with grassroots organizations, donated portions of her earnings to marginalized communities, and mentored young entrepreneurs building businesses rooted in social impact. Through it all, Maya never lost sight of her mission. Every podcast episode, every book sold, every speech delivered brought her closer to the equitable world she envisioned. What started as a single act of defiance on an airplane had grown into a multifaceted movement touching millions of lives. And though the road ahead was still long, Maya walked it with unwavering confidence, knowing she was planting seeds of change that would grow for generations to come. As Maya's influence continued to grow, so did her reputation as someone who didn't shy away from making bold moves. Companies that had once dismissed Equity First as just another consulting firm now scrambled to hire her, fearing the consequences of ignoring their discriminatory practices. Maya became known not only for identifying toxic workplace cultures, but also for taking decisive action, often by firing executives and managers whose behavior perpetuated inequality. Her signature phrase, "If you can't respect your employees, you're fired," became a rallying cry for accountability. Maya approached each project with surgical precision. When a company hired Equity First, she made it clear from the start. No one was untouchable. Executives accustomed to operating without oversight quickly learned that Maya wasn't afraid to dismantle power structures if they stood in the way of fairness. In one high-profile case, a Fortune 500 company brought her in after a series of scandals involving sexual harassment and racial bias. After a thorough audit, Maya discovered that several senior leaders had ignored complaints or actively covered up misconduct. Without hesitation, she recommended terminating them, and personally oversaw their departures to ensure transparency. The move sent shockwaves through the industry, signaling that even the most powerful figures weren't above reproach. Her methods drew both praise and criticism. Supporters hailed her as a revolutionary figure, someone willing to take on entrenched systems of privilege and hold individuals accountable for their actions. Critics, however, accused her of wielding too much authority, claiming she was creating a culture of fear among corporate leaders. Some argued that firing people should be a last resort, not the default solution. But Maya remained unapologetic. "Accountability isn't punishment," she explained during an interview. "It's about setting standards and showing everyone, from interns to CEOs, that harmful behavior has consequences." Despite the backlash, companies couldn't deny the results. Businesses transformed by Equity First saw dramatic improvements in employee satisfaction, retention rates, and public perception. Employees reported feeling safer and more valued, while customers appreciated brands aligning themselves with equity and inclusion. For many organizations, working with Maya wasn't just a business decision, it was a statement of intent. They wanted the world to know they were serious about change, and having Maya Thompson's stamp of approval carried significant weight. But Maya didn't stop at firing problematic leaders. She also worked tirelessly to rebuild what came after. She implemented training programs focused on empathy, communication, and cultural competence. She helped design policies that promoted diversity at every level of an organization, ensuring that underrepresented voices had a seat at the table. And perhaps most importantly, she empowered employees to speak up when something felt wrong. Silence is complicity, she often reminded teams during workshops. If you see injustice, say something. If you experience it, report it. Together, we create change. One of Maya's proudest moments came when a tech startup she'd worked with won an award for being one of the most inclusive workplaces in the country. Just 2 years earlier, The company had been embroiled in controversy over pay disparities and hostile work environments. With Maya's guidance, they had completely turned things around, earning trust and loyalty from their staff. At the awards ceremony, the CEO publicly thanked Maya, saying, "She didn't just fix our problems. She taught us how to be better humans." Still, Maya knew the fight was far from over. While some industries embraced her methods, others resisted fiercely. Certain companies tried to discredit her, spreading rumors or questioning her motives. Others attempted to co-opt her message, using buzzwords like diversity and inclusion without making real changes. But Maya saw through these tactics. She called out performative allyship whenever she encountered it, reminding audiences that true equity required action, not empty promises. Through it all, Maya stayed grounded, remembering why she started this journey. Every executive she fired, every policy she rewrote, every employee she empowered brought her closer to the world she envisioned. One where fairness wasn't the exception, but the rule. As her fame grew, so did her resolve. She knew the road ahead would still have obstacles, but she faced them head-on, determined to leave a legacy of justice and empowerment. Years had passed since that fateful day on the airplane, and Maya Thompson now stood at a global leadership summit, addressing an audience of thousands. The stage lights glowed warmly around her as she looked out at the sea of faces, diverse, hopeful, and eager to learn. She took a deep breath, reflecting on how far she'd come. What started as a humiliating incident had transformed into a lifelong mission to create a fairer, more equitable world. Today, Maya wasn't just a survivor. She was a leader, a trailblazer, and a symbol of resilience. Her journey hadn't been easy. There were moments when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming, times when critics tried to tear her down, and days when progress seemed painfully slow. But through it all, Maya remained steadfast. Her work with Equity First had dismantled toxic systems in countless organizations, while her podcast Firing Back and best-selling memoir had inspired millions to take action in their own lives. Companies once resistant to change now sought her guidance, knowing that ignoring inequality was no longer an option, not in a world Maya had helped reshape. As she spoke, Maya shared stories of the people who had shaped her path, the passengers who defended her on that flight, the strangers who sent messages of support during her lawsuit, and the employees she'd empowered through Equity First. "This isn't my story alone," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It belongs to everyone who has ever stood up against injustice, no matter how small the act may seem." She reminded the audience that change didn't happen overnight. It required persistence, courage, and collective effort. Maya also acknowledged the challenges ahead. Despite the progress she'd witnessed, discrimination still existed in many forms. New industries emerged with fresh biases, and marginalized communities continued to face barriers. But instead of feeling defeated, Maya saw these challenges as opportunities for growth. "We can't stop fighting," she urged. "Every generation inherits the unfinished work of the last. Our job is to carry the torch forward." To ensure her impact would endure, Maya focused on nurturing the next wave of leaders. Through the Equity Forward Scholarship Fund, she supported young Black professionals pursuing careers in law, advocacy, and social justice. Many of the scholarship recipients had gone on to make waves in their fields, crediting Maya for believing in them when others didn't. She also launched mentorship programs connecting seasoned activists with newcomers, creating a network of changemakers ready to tackle tomorrow's battles. The legacy Maya built extended beyond policies and profits. It touched hearts. People from all walks of life reached out to thank her for giving them hope. A single mother wrote to say she finally felt confident enough to report workplace harassment after hearing Maya's story. A college student shared how Firing Back inspired him to start a campus initiative promoting inclusivity. Even former executives fired by Maya admitted they'd grown from the experience, vowing to lead with integrity moving forward. As her speech drew to a close, Maya left the audience with one final thought. Change doesn't happen when we stay silent. It happens when we stand up, Speak out and hold those in power accountable. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. Find your community, lift each other up, and keep pushing forward. When she stepped off the stage, applause erupted, echoing through the hall like thunder. Tears welled in her eyes as she hugged colleagues, friends, and mentees who had joined her on this journey. For Maya, this moment wasn't about personal glory, it was about gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, the lives touched, and the future yet to unfold. Though her story began with an unjust act, it ended with triumph, not just for herself, but for everyone who dared to dream of a better world. Maya Thompson had proven that even in the face of adversity, one person could ignite a movement, and as long as there were people willing to fight for justice, her legacy would live on.